The alien world under Antarctica. You know, when you picture our most remote continent, you probably just see this endless, silent, flat expanse of white, right? But the reality? Well, the reality is far more dynamic, way more dangerous, and honestly, vastly more important to our future than most people realize. Welcome to this explainer. Okay, let's dive into this. What exactly is hiding beneath the most remote continent on Earth? If you're just standing there on the surface, it seems completely dead. No birds, no plants, literally just frozen static. But directly beneath the boots of the scientist actually walking out there is an incredibly active, hidden ecosystem. We're talking about a world sealed off from the rest of the planet for millions of years. And to understand what's really down there, we have to start drilling. First up, we've got to wrap our heads around the sheer scale of the ice we're dealing with. A staggering 70% of the entire planet's fresh water is locked up right here. That's exactly why what happens here is absolutely crucial for global sea levels everywhere else. To put that into perspective, the ice is so thick that if you cut out a chunk at its deepest point and just set it on the ground, it would rival the height of Mount Kilimanjaro. You'd literally have to stack the tallest building in the world 6 times just to reach the top. It's massive. All right, so as we start our descent into the ice, we actually pass through snow first, which surprisingly is kind of scarce. Technically, Antarctica is a frozen desert. It's the driest, coldest, windiest continent on Earth, only getting a couple centimeters of snow a year. But as that snow slowly builds up and compresses under its own weight, it turns into something called firn. Think of firn like this giant frozen sponge. And because the incredible weight of the growing ice sheet slowly pushes it outward toward the ocean, this firn stretches and snaps. That creates these massive, terrifying hidden crevasses that you absolutely under no circumstances want to fall into. So how do we actually know what's down there if we're trying so hard not to fall in? Well, back in the 1950s, scientists literally just exploded TNT on the surface and measured the seismic shockwaves bouncing back up through the ice. Crazy, right? Today, thankfully, the tech is straight out of a sci-fi movie. We're bouncing space lasers from satellites to detect tiny wrinkles on the surface and flying planes rigged with ice-penetrating radar back and forth across the continent. All of this basically lets us echolocate an entire hidden world. Let's keep going deeper. As we travel down through the ice, we are quite literally traveling back in time. See, that heavy, crushed firn traps little pockets of air, giving us these perfect atmospheric bubbles from the exact moment that snow fell. Scientists pull up long cylinders of this ice, called ice cores, and they serve as a literal frozen time machine. As we pull these cores up, we're traveling back past the Roman Empire, past ancient Egypt, past the extinction of the Neanderthals, all the way down to continuous cores holding air from 1.2 million years ago. They even capture dark bands of volcanic ash, giving us a perfect archive of Earth's climate history. Now, because this archive is perfectly preserved, there's a really strict and honestly pretty funny rule for anyone working on the surface. You absolutely cannot pee on the ice in Antarctica. Why? Because hundreds of years from now, some distant descendant of yours might be out there drilling an ice core, carefully charting our planet's history, only to hit a mysterious yellow line and wonder what massive global event caused it. It's a funny little detail for sure, but it perfectly highlights just how meticulously this environment traps and preserves everything. Okay, we are now over 2 miles down, and the ice has completely changed. There are no more air bubbles. It's so clear you could read a book right through it. And that's because this deep ice isn't coming from fallen snow above anymore. It's actually coming from below. Down here, the pressure is just crushing. We're talking 350 times greater than what you feel at sea level. When you combine that immense pressure with the geothermal heat rising up from Earth's core, you get an incredible physical reaction. Water can actually stay perfectly liquid even at freezing temperatures. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is what all that liquid water creates. Decades of radar data finally revealed a hidden lake beneath the ice. And we're not talking about a little puddle. Lake Vostok is roughly the size of Lake Ontario, it's the 6th largest lake in the world by volume, and it has been sealed in absolute pitch-black darkness for 15 million years. But Vostok isn't a lone outlier. We've actually discovered this vast, interconnected plumbing system of nearly 700 subglacial lakes. This network is so incredibly active that as rivers flow from one lake to another, they literally lift and drop the miles-thick ice sheet above by up to 10 meters. Just think about that kind of power. Naturally, once scientists found this ancient liquid world, they wanted to sample it. They wanted to know, is anything actually alive down there? but they faced a truly terrifying risk. Dr. John Priscu summed it up perfectly. He said, if you take a Pepsi bottle and you put in a Mentos, it just blows up. So that's what we're looking at. These lakes are under such extreme pressure that puncturing the ice could cause a massive, potentially deadly blowout of pressurized lake water, basically erupting just like a volcano. So how do you safely poke an ancient pressurized lake without contaminating the whole thing or blowing yourself up? Well, early attempts by a Russian team used a drill fluid heavily mixed with kerosene, which unfortunately ended up contaminating their samples. But a later combined effort figured out a brilliant new method. They used super clean, boiling hot water decontaminated with UV light to literally melt through those final layers. When they finally broke through, the pressurized water safely shot up the hole, pushing any debris out of the way. They let it freeze, extracted the core, and what they found inside was an absolute scientific miracle. A thriving ecosystem of bacteria and viruses perfectly adapted to live in complete pitch-black isolation.
Finding life. We're talking colonies of bacteria and swimming amphipods surviving in total darkness under miles of ice. That fundamentally changes how we view the universe. Deep Antarctica actually gives us a direct blueprint for finding alien life. The extreme conditions down there are our closest natural analog to the icy moons in our solar system, like Jupiter's Europa or Saturn's Enceladus. Because, hey, if life can find a way to survive the crushing pressure and complete darkness right here on Earth, scientists are more confident than ever that we might just find life sealed beneath the frozen shells of those distant moons. But here's the crucial point. This hidden plumbing system doesn't just stay put forever. Eventually, it makes its way out. Occasionally, this subglacial system breaches the surface, and the most famous spot for this is called Blood Falls. It's exactly what it sounds like, an outflow of ancient, ultra-salty, iron-rich brine. When it hits the surface air, the iron oxidizes, it basically rusts, and stains the glacier this intense, deep blood red. But this isn't just some spooky visual trick. When this nutrient-rich, iron-heavy water finally flows into the Southern Ocean, it acts like a massive fertilizer. It feeds the ocean's phytoplankton, which then feeds the krill, which in turn supports the largest animals to ever exist on Earth, blue whales. So the ecosystem at the very top is entirely reliant on this hidden world at the very bottom. And finally, we've reached the absolute bottom of our descent, the hidden bedrock of the continent itself. If you digitally strip away all the ice, Antarctica is definitely not just some flat, frozen rock. No way. It hides dozens of active volcanoes that are actively melting the ice from below. It contains the Gumbertsev Mountains, an entire mountain range the size of a European Alps, completely buried in darkness. It hides Denman Canyon, literally the deepest land canyon on Earth, plunging over 3.5 kilometers below sea level. And etched right into this rock are the fossilized roots of ancient green forests. It's undeniable proof that this frozen land was once a lush, temperate paradise. This hidden bedrock dictates the entire continent's future. You see, there's a massive geological divide going on here. East Antarctica sits on ancient, thick, and highly stable continental crust. But West Antarctica is an entirely different story. Millions of years ago, tectonic forces stretched and thinned the crust over there, fracturing it and bringing the Earth's geothermal heat much closer to the surface. That is exactly why West Antarctica hosts all those subglacial volcanoes. It's melting from the warming oceans above, sure, but it is also being cooked by the active geology down below, which is really accelerating the catastrophic ice loss we're seeing today. All right, so we've covered the incredible science beneath the ice, but we need to zoom out a bit and look at the surface politics. The year 1959 is pivotal. That's when the Antarctic Treaty was signed. This international agreement designated the entire continent as a zone strictly for peace and science. It explicitly prohibited military use, it suspended all territorial claims, and eventually it banned all mining and resource extraction. For over 60 years, this treaty has held Earth's last frontier in a really tight protective embrace. However, that dynamic is starting to shift. Because Antarctica shares the exact same deep geology as resource-rich continents like South America, Africa, and Australia, geological surveys suggest there are potentially trillions of dollars in undiscovered resources buried beneath the ice, and global superpowers are positioning themselves accordingly. Russia has been mapping potential oil and gas resources in Antarctic waters. China is investing heavily in logistics and building brand new year-round research stations. Meanwhile, the United States is dealing with some pretty aging infrastructure and funding uncertainties. Regardless of where you stand on it, the geopolitical reality is simple. Presence equals power on this continent. And that brings us to the ticking clock, 2048.
This is the exact year that the Antarctic Treaty's ban on mining and resource extraction can be formally reviewed. That is roughly 2 decades away. The global race to establish a permanent strategic foothold is already well underway, long before this critical deadline actually hits.
Which leaves us reflecting on this really powerful thought. Some environments function precisely because they have been left alone. We've seen today that Antarctica is anything but empty. It's a highly complex, deeply connected system. The heat shapes the land, the ice controls the water carries the ancient nutrients, and those nutrients sustain life all the way up to the massive blue whales. It's this beautifully fragile balance that took tens of millions of years to build, but it would take far, far less time to disrupt. Which leaves us with one final urgent question to think about. What happens to Earth's last untouched frontier when those treaty protections can be reviewed in 2048? As technology advances and the ice recedes, things that were once completely unreachable are becoming viable. It is a highly precarious future for a continent that holds the history of our entire planet, and just perhaps the keys to our survival.